Okay, today I'm going to be focusing on A Christmas Carol, and I'm going to focus very much on Scrooge because the one thing about this book is character-wise, it's all about Scrooge. Okay, all about Scrooge. Um, Nobody else really is important enough to have a question about them on their own. Next level down would be Fred. He'd probably be the next most important character, but as you know, he only appears about 3 times in the whole thing. So it's pretty much always variations on Scrooge. And of course, the point behind Scrooge is that he is transformed. That's what we're looking at here. It's all about how he changes. You got to remember, he's effectively a kind of pantomime character. Really, he's a caricature. He is not realistic. I've said this to people who've I've spoken to before about A Christmas Carol. But one of the reasons why, despite this being the most filmed story ever, the reason why most filmed versions of A Christmas Carol are rubbish is because they try and take Scrooge too seriously. They try and turn him into a real character. And he's not a real character. At the beginning of the play, he's the most horrible, grumpy, evil man in existence. By the next morning, he is the nicest man in existence. It's a pantomime change. We mustn't really make the mistake of seeing him as too real. There are elements to his character, but I think we've got to understand he's there representing a change and a transformation. And so that's what we're going for today, how he's transformed. Now, the page references that I put in here aren't necessarily, I don't know whether they're accurate or not because they're off a different edition to the one that most of you have got, but the one that I've been working from. So hopefully they'll be there, but you'll recognise them otherwise. So let's think about the beginning. Let's think about the very opening of the novella and how he's set up. Now, one of the most interesting things is that at the beginning, what we don't have is what we're used to in writing, which is that thing that you're all told in creative writing: show, don't tell. You know, create a character, establish a character by letting us meet them, letting us experience them, letting us see them, letting us understand them. No. This is how we get used to the way that he wants us to see this character, because he tells us all about it. There is no chance of a different interpretation. He says to us, as I'm sure many of you will remember down to it, that he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. He was a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. He was hard and sharp as flint. He carried around his own low temperature with him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. These aren't showing us things. These are telling us. He is like this. It's no interpretation at all. So why is that important? Because it means we have to start at this point of a man who is worse than everybody else around him. Remember that bit about how guide dogs keep blind men away from him, you know, as if there's a problem there. We've got images of cold and heat. The fact that he takes cold with him everywhere he goes. The fact that everyone else brings heat. It's interesting that when Fred turns up, one of the things that we're told about him is that he's ruddy with warmth. He kind of brings a warmth with him. But Scrooge has his own coldness there. That physical description of him that tells us that he has red eyes, blue lips, a pointed nose, a shriveled cheek, and a stiffened gait way of walking. So immediately he is quite defaced. He looks, again, quite almost vulture-like, I suppose, in some ways. Almost some kind of bird of prey that he looks there. And what I always find interesting as well, whenever you see a production, this a TV version of this, a film, you always have him talking in a big, very deep voice. But it says he has a grating voice. So I think it's more likely he'd talk a bit like that. It's horrible, really. Every element of him, every physical element of him goes with that unpleasantness that's there. And that whole bit about other people and the weather and everything is telling you that nobody's influence makes any difference to him, which of course is vital because that's exactly what's about to happen. Yeah. Nobody makes any difference to him until this happens now. And the final point made about him is that he lives in deliberate isolation. So there's the picture that we're portrayed with. No chance of a different interpretation. He is cold. He physically represents the way he behaves. He does not. He doesn't allow any external influences to change him in any way at all, and he isolates himself. So now the stage is set. He has to go from there to where he is at the end. So I want to focus in on the key moments of the transformation. This is another one that differs from most of the film versions of it. With the film versions, you'll see that it's a very slow change, a very gradual change over the thing. And it really only comes when he sees his own grave that he actually realizes who he is. But that's not true in the book at all. The transformation comes in stages, but quite quickly in some ways. Let's take some of these key moments. First of all, Marley. Now, this is where I'll see if it's, I think it might be around about page 21 in your copy here. It's basically where Scrooge is doubting Marley's ghost. There goes, actually a page later, 22 in this one. He's doubting that Marley's ghost actually exists. Okay? He's laughing, he's joking, he's making those really, really sharp comments that he does. One interesting thing about Scrooge is that he does have a sense of humour, a dark sense of humour. He does have a sense of humour even from the start. This whole thing about, yeah, you're just a piece of undigested beef that's making me see you here. But it's almost kind of humour as a barrier, isn't it? Like so many people do. But the moment that breaks him down is when Marley suddenly cries out and his jaw, if you remember, drops down to his chest. A moment that wouldn't be out of place in our modern horror film. And it's at that moment that what Scrooge does, he throws himself to his knees. Okay? He throws himself onto his knees. So again, immediate change. Not just, okay, all right, I believe you, but, oh my God, forgive me. Clasping his hand before his face. Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? And from that moment on, he only discusses things with the ghost. He doesn't ever confront it. So the first thing that changes his mind is a moment of horror, of seeing something beyond this world, of seeing something outside his experience, external influences. So that's my first point to you. It's kicked in by having to listen to something beyond because of the supernatural element of it. Now, the next moment, then we go into stave 2. Now, stave 2 is the key bit of his transformation, really, because it is all about him. And I've said this other times before, and some of you will have heard me. But Scrooge, but the different staves all have a different function in A Christmas Carol. And actually, not all of them are to do with Scrooge. The first stave is very much about establishing Scrooge and his character and getting us used to what he's like. The second stave is about his past and his childhood, filling in the background, giving us a sense as to why he's the person he is and how he became it. The third stanza, yeah, he's in it, and it does tell us stuff about it. It's not really about him at all, it's about Christmas. It's pretty much Dickens just showing us, well, this is what Christmas should be like. Okay? And the fourth, I always would argue, is far more about poverty and wealth. He's much more interested in the fourth one in showing us a future if we allow, or if people at the time allow poverty and wealth to go the way that they are and the split to come, the horrors that will come. It's not really about Scrooge at all. So a lot comes in this second stage. And the first point is when he sees Child Scrooge for the first time. Nothing else has to happen. He doesn't have to see any more kind of details at all. When he sees him, and again, yes, the page reference isn't correct here. When he sees his lonely self for the first time, the ghost says, a solitary child neglected by his friends is left there still. Scrooge says he knows it, and he sobs. Straight away, he sobs. In fact, actually, that is even before he's seen himself. That's when he just has to remember that he was there on his own. He sobbed. And then they go off and find him, and he sees the only boy there. Now, notice the word sobbed. I'm not a great fan of people doing language analysis when it's literature, and people spend too much time on individual words. But he doesn't just cry, he sobs. It's like, you know, when you sob, it's like releasing a lot of emotion inside you, isn't it? It's like letting out built up emotion inside you. Is that therefore how we're meant to see this moment? That it's always been there inside him, and seeing himself as a person before all of this happened to him, before he changed at all, is enough to release those emotions. Now that means the transformation becomes something else. It's not that he changes as much as he releases somebody inside. And that may well be an interpretation that we could have here. Now, after all of those episodes in stage 2, another thing that's important and worth noticing is the regrets that he has. After the whole bit where he sees himself as a child and the thing coming past the door and everything, he says to the ghost, the ghost says to him, "What's up with you?" You know, he looks a bit strange. He says, "He's thinking about that carol singing and wishing he'd given him some money." Now, this is as quick as he's seen himself alone and abandoned as a child. And it makes him think straight away, I wish I had given some money to somebody who a few pages before he was going out with a ruler. Like I said, it painted in broad strokes. When he then sees Fan and the whole thing about him being taken home from it, first of all, he says, at the end, he doesn't actually say anything at the end, but he looks very pensive at the end, and the ghost turns to him and basically reminds him of Fred and the fact that Fred is her only surviving relative, okay, her only son. And so again, he thinks of the other person that he has just dismissed. And then at the end of the Fezziwig episode, he says, I wish I could speak a few words to my clerk right now. It makes him think of Bob, and he wants to say something positive to him because he's just seen what Fezziwig does. It's that quick. Straight away when he sees these things, he's ready to turn and say, I wish I had dealt with this differently. But then, if everything stopped at that point, well, yeah, maybe he would look at things differently, but he could quite quickly go back that way. It's not enough for what Dickens wants. There is more, of course, in stage 2, where it's then taken over by Bell, and that actually winds him up so much that he tries to extinguish the ghost. But the next main moment of transformation for him comes in stage 3. As I said, it's not really about Scrooge most of it, but there's that little bit, if you remember, where he sees the Cratchit's Christmas and he has an instant connection with Tiny Tim. He straight away empathizes with him. Why? I don't know. He's a horrible kid. But, you know, and those of you I haven't expressed it to before, frankly, I'm quite glad when Tiny Tim dies. It's so annoying, really, honestly. You know, that horrible stuff about, oh, I hope people noticed I was a cripple when I was in church, so they could think of the person who made cripples walk again. Oh, shut up. Pious little, oh, anyway. But apparently Scrooge empathizes with him and likes to look at him, and it makes him think again, he wants Tiny Tim to live. He's worried about his future. He's worried about where he's going to go. And of course, it's that moment at which, for the first time, he does it again with Ignorance and Want, but for the first time, the Ghost of Christmas Present throws back in the things he said earlier. Okay, in stanza 1 about the poor. But it is an important moment because it makes him want connect with an individual. The previous ones are about his treatment of people, but this is connecting with another person. Remember at that opening bit? Isolated, deliberate isolation. Now he wants to connect. Then, of course, we do get ignorance and want. Now, don't get me wrong. As far as I'm concerned, Dickens is using the ignorance and want thing to make a point to his audience, to be honest, about what will happen if they don't change. It's not really much about Scrooge. However, Scrooge's reaction to what he sees does suggest elements of change here. This is right at the end, obviously, of stage 3. Where Scrooge is really upset. Notice the things that he does. First of all, it says he tries to say to the ghost that they are fine children, but the words choke themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. He wants to say something positive, say something nice. So that's his instinct. Transformation. We're only at the end of stage 3. Already, he wants to compliment rather than abuse, as he does earlier. But he's unable to lie that much. Not only is that the horror of ignorance and want, but it also shows you a great deal where he is at that point. And then when the spirit turns on him with "Are there no prisons?" and whatever, with his own words, he doesn't address it back. He just lets it go. He accepts that he was wrong. So even by the end of 3, we've got to a point where he wants to treat people differently. He wants things to be, his natural instinct is now to be complimentary and be positive. He wants to connect with somebody, okay? And somebody who needs his help. So then we move into stage 4. And another moment of his transformation comes when that third ghost arrives. When the ghost of Christmas yet to come arrives, and he basically accepts him immediately. He says, "I am terrified of you, but I want you to show me how to change. I want you to show me your lesson." At the beginning of stage 3, he says to the ghost of Christmas present, "I'm ready for whatever you want to show me now." He accepts it. But stage 4, I want to know it. I want to know how to be a better person. I want you to help me. So again, a very, very important element. And again, shows you the extent the transformation has to be, that it's not complete yet. It does complete when he sees his grave. Partially because that's what happens to him. Yeah, okay, and he wants to change that. But also, I don't know. Also, I think I'd probably suggest that it's partially that understanding of where everything is heading. That life is short, that, in the end, he understands mortality and understands, therefore, the value of humans and human life. And how do we know that the transformation is full? We've seen these small elements. We've seen him gain empathy. We've seen him change to be more complimentary. How do we know it's complete? It's because he says, "I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all 3 shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach." So Dickens is saying to us that the key he has to accept for this transformation is not just that there's bits of him that need to change, he needs to be different. The entirety of him, the entirety of his attitude, the entirety of his life needs to change. The whole year, the past, the present, the future. What do you mean I will live in the past, the present, and the future? I mean, why is that a good thing? He's going to live in the past because he's not going to forget what he did to other people or what he could have been. Living in the future, what does he mean? He's going to think about the consequences of his actions. It's worth thinking about. But this is the center of his transformation. So if you get a question that involves something like this with Scrooge, or involves Scrooge any way at all, be thinking about this whole idea, this purpose of change from beginning to end, the stages that he goes through along the way, and the fact that he's already sobbing by the beginning of stage 2. He's already released that emotion. The transformation isn't about forcing him to accept it. It's not. If you saw the Apple TV thing this Christmas, the what's it called? The musical thing they did with Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds, where they again were doing that kind of idea of a Christmas Carol thing being updated. But their whole thing again was to go with how hard it is to crack somebody like Scrooge or somebody like the person they have in before. It's not hard to crack him at all. It's really not hard. What is difficult is to get the thorough change all the way through it. So, links across the text. How do we know, how do we see the consequences of the change? It's because you often heard this said that this is a circular text. Everyone loves a bit of circular text. But the fact that he chooses stage 5 to be back as a constant to stage 1. Remember, stage 1 is the afternoon and evening of Christmas Eve. Stage 5 is the morning of the next day. Everything in between is this kind of magical, strange twist of time where he's been taken off in all these places. But it literally is, one is the evening, one is the next morning. And so the links are very, very important. Okay, here's what I mean by this. Right at the beginning, we're told how these people keep out of his way. We're told about how, as we said before, beggars keep out of his way. Don't ever ask him to give them a little trifle. No children, as it says, asking what time it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place. A triplet. Beggars, children, man or woman, people in general. Then we go right to the end. In stage 5, when he goes out onto the streets, if I can find it here, the same people come up. He goes to church, walks about the streets, watches people coming to and fro. He pats children on the head. He questions beggars. Watches the people hurrying to and fro, patted children on the head, question beggars. It's the same 3 reversed. Quite deliberate. Avoided by beggars, by children, by men and women, by people. Other way around, he watches the people going past, he pats children on the head, and he voluntarily questions beggars. A deliberate thing to show you, by the link, the change that has gone on. They avoided him, he seeks them out and looks for them. Obviously, Fred is an obvious thing, right? How Fred, at the beginning, he's rude to Fred when Fred is offering to have him for lunch and dismisses him, tells him he thinks Christmas, and then at the end, he goes to Fred's house and spends Christmas there. Yeah, sure, obvious. But what's actually much more interesting is his comments on Fred's marriage. When he talks to Fred, he says to him, "Why did you marry?" Which is a really strange thing to say, isn't it, to him? I mean, he's having to go in and saying, "What, you're poor enough. Why are you so happy? You could do with more money. Why are you so interested in Christmas?" All those things you can understand him saying, but why did you marry? It's quite a sharp thing to say to him. Now, obviously, we find out about Belle, and that probably explains things to him. But when he goes to Fred's in stage 5, it's made very clear that he is particularly happy to see his niece. Okay? He goes along there, and nothing to make him happier. His niece looked just the same as he did. And if you remember in stage 3, when he sees it, the niece is quite at the heart of things. He's quite impressed by her when he looks at it. So he actually changes his opinion on her as much as on Fred, and on the value of her and her as a married person. So again, a change that comes through very clearly. Scrooge's room becomes very, very different. Okay? We see at the beginning how it's a cold and sad and unpleasant place when he goes to it, and dark. But at the beginning of stage 5, when he comes back to it, he is bouncing around it. He sees how the bed curtains aren't torn down anymore, like they were in stage 4 for that. And it becomes a much more happy place, a much more pleasant place to be. Okay? He looks at various things. The saucepan that the gruel was in, the door by which Marley entered, the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat, the window where he saw the phantoms outside. And he sees it with happiness. So the moments of distress become moments of happiness and excitement. Again, I'm leaving out the obvious ones. You know, the portly gentleman coming back at the end. Yeah, okay, yes, obvious, right? He refuses the money at the end. He sees him at the end, at the beginning, sees him at the end, offers him ridiculous amounts of money. Yeah, we've got that. Yeah, the carol singer at the beginning, he wants to tap him with a ruler, and then at the end, he uses a little boy to go and fetch him a turkey and says what a wonderful person he is. But these are just little deeper ones here. Laughs. Now, there's an interesting connection here, not necessarily with the beginning, but one of the things that's noted when he goes to Fred's house in stage 3 is Fred is introduced by a laugh. I don't know if you remember this. As the scene changes, if I can just find it in here and get the exact bit. As the scene changes, here we go. It says, it was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. First thing he hears, a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to recognise it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry gleaming room. So he's introduced it. Then, at first thing with Scrooge, underneath that, ha ha, laughs Scrooge's nephew, ha ha ha. And it goes to, if you should happen by any unlucky chance to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. In a few lines after that, it goes on again about how contagious laughter is, how the nephew laughs and then Scrooge's niece starts to laugh like that, and all the friends roar out laughing. He makes a big deal of this idea of laughter. And then what about the end? In stage 5, just after that bit I say where he looks at the bits of his house. It's all true. It all happened, he says. Ha, ha, ha. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. A most illustrious laugh. The father of a long, long line of laughs. His change, his transformation is illustrated to us through that same idea of laughter and the repetition of laugh making that point, and the fact it's a father of a load of laughs. He's going to keep laughing for the whole time. Okay, so just as we get to the end there, I've talked about his transformation, I've talked about links and things going across. Let's make clear, how has he changed? Okay, how does Dickens make clear that he is different? First of all, through the change of weather. Do notice this, remember, fog and cold at the beginning. It's foggy and it's cold. At the end, it's still cold. The cold doesn't change, but it's bright sunshine and the fog has lifted. Okay? You can do what you like with that. The cold is still there. The reality of the world maybe is still there, but the fog has lifted. He sees more clearly. Think of what fog generally represents. You know, fogging up, you can't see properly. This idea of laughter is added to in the same bit, with laughing and crying in the same breath, with the fact he chuckles, and it's repeated when he chuckles over and over again. And at the end, his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. In fact, it's quite interesting that that last bit there, his own heart laughed, and it was quite enough for him, is a moment at which it points out that people basically laughed at him for changing. And it's him accepting that that was what the way things were going to be. And it doesn't matter to him. As long as he was laughing inside, that's what mattered. So laughter kind of representing not just outside, but inside as well. He changes in terms of the idea of a love of fun. I said to you, we saw that sense of humour at the beginning, that dark sense of humour that was there, those nasty, sharp comments that were quite witty, I suppose. That turns into a real love of fun. That idea that he's sending an anonymous turkey, he never lets them know. He loves the idea that a random massive turkey is going to turn up at the Cratchit's door and they'll never know who it's from. His decision to play a trick on Bob the next day and pretend to be his old self shows an awareness of who he was and how he's changed. Right? It will be much more fun if I pretend to be that, frighten him, and then say, and I'm going to give you a raise instead. But it's also important to notice that his anxieties are still there, his worries are still there. He's aware the impact it's having. It's not just he's changed and everyone's going to accept it. How's it going to be different? First of all, when he approaches the portly gentleman, it says he's nervous because he knows how he spoke to them before. And he doesn't feel comfortable coming and speaking to them because of the way he spoke to them before. Again, showing you the difficulty, the shame almost he has in who he used to be. And his anxiety. If you remember when he's knocking at Fred's door in Stage 5, he is very anxious about it. He takes a long time. It describes him walking about, waiting outside and going up to the door and then coming away. He's very, very unsure about doing this. Okay? Basically, the change is pantomime, but it's interesting to see that he isn't just suddenly absolutely perfect. There is still cold. There is still nerves and anxiety about the way he is before. People laugh at the change in him. It's not going to be easy for him. But the difference is the happiness inside himself. So he transforms earlier, and it's a more interesting place at the end. And I think that's very much what you're looking at. Remember, A Christmas Carol is as didactic a book, really, in some ways, as Inspector calls it. It was done for a very, very clear purpose. Well, actually, probably about 4 very clear purposes. But Dickens is not letting us decide for ourselves what we think is going on. So what we can do is look at how he makes that journey. Okay. I hope that's been of help. Can't remember what the next one is, but hopefully see you there. Okay.